Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Battle Worth Fighting. Over the last 2 months, we've done a series on Hurricane Helene, and we wanted to do a fifth part in our series specifically dealing with how to process grief and healing. So this next conversation was a Zoom call with a dear friend of mine who walks people through grief and healing recovery. We hope you enjoy this video. We hope that it brings healing and at least a baseline of a starting point of how to get healthy and whole after such trauma that you guys have all experienced. Please send them this video. It's really meant to be a baseline to help people process the grief that everybody's been through up in Western North Carolina. Enjoy the episode.
Jeff and I open up this time to welcome you into this place. So Father, we welcome you and thank you that you gave us a model. Thank you for Jeremiah 31 that I went back and read about that you give those who mourn joy. And I feel like that was a prophecy of you, Christ, and you wanted our joy to be complete in us. You wanted your joy to be complete in us, but we can't get there if we don't go through the grief door. Father, this is just you and the wilderness, animals, people, hearts, in real life. This isn't tricky. Father, thank you for your love. In a world of AI, thank you for your simplicity. In the name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Great prayer. So 2 months ago, Hurricane Helene came through Western North Carolina, and I sent you a message, and because you're in Asheville, and I said, hey, is there anything I can do to help you? Tell us about your journey when Hurricane Helene came through in late September and just how it's affected you and your family.
My brother, because the 26th was closed off north to Tennessee, my brother, we found a cell phone coverage or a cell phone tower was open near downtown Asheville. And I said, hey, can you send me the directions through the mountains to get to Johnson City? And he did. And that's when it all began for me. I mean, that's when I really realized what we were dealing with going through Burnsville and Bakerville. It was so crazy. I mean, giant water tanks from mountains, those giant water, not the little, I'm talking the things that hold communities' waters were at the bottom of the mountain. Train cars were moved, giant steel I-beams were bent, and it looked like a bomb had gone off. And so we kind of weaved our way through the mountains. On the side of the mountain, half the road's gone, and we're kind of going behind guys with power chainsaws and just making it through and got to Johnson City and got some fuel. And it was just, at that point, I remembered that I thought, why is this exciting for me? Why am I feel prepared for this? And I realized it's because I'd been through a flood in 2016 that I'd kind of blocked out. We lost our entire home in Austin, Texas, south of Austin. We had a similar type of flood that just came through, and in 40 minutes, it wiped out our entire little town of Wimberley there. And it was at that point I told Ann, I said, I feel like I need to get back up to Bakerville to help people because I've been there. I know what they're going through. They're just trying to survive right now. They don't even know how to cook. They don't even know how to go that next day because there's so much going on. So long story, we prayed and God put on our heart to Ann says, why don't you make your chili? And so I borrowed everyone had their garages open now because everyone finally came out of their homes. And I saw this guy's 50-gallon or something crawfish boil pot. And I thought, I wonder if he'd let me borrow that. And we were able to get a lot of meat. And so I cooked about 20 gallons of chili and went back out to that area in Bakerville to feed people, to feed the linemen. They're pulling 16-hour days to try to cut trees down. They were to put up electricity and just to give people that one night and any more nights of food. And I mean, people would bring out their Tupperware or whatever, their lock and locks and fill it up. And they were so amazed because I just decided I wasn't going to go mess with FEMA. The Spirit just told me go door to door. And so I literally go door to door in the mountain near Bakerville, and people were just kind of shocked at first. Like, what are you doing? And I said, here, do you want some chili? I actually had some cold beer too. I knew too, if I had a cold beer, people were literally normal was over. And so I think just having a cold beer and some chili, it anchored them back to a community, and people felt like I needed that. I needed some normalcy right now because this is a mess. And so that was really cool just to go door to door and We eventually found a motel that had a ton of workers, a ton of people displaced, elderly, and then some FEMA folks, and they all came out and we had a big feast there. And it wasn't, again, this isn't long-term care, but even your contribution when you made that, I immediately, that's actually what it helped me buy all that food. It was like, it's not cheap to feed, that many, almost 100 people. So it was actually such an amazing moment, but it was just the tip of the iceberg. I knew that the longer term reality would be grief recovery for these folks that had just lost everything. That became more apparent for me, is what in the world are these folks going to do that were already hurting? A lot of these folks were homeless up there. A lot of these people didn't even have residence. They lived up there in the woods. So what's everyone going to do to help heal through losing everything and also grieving the process of losing loved ones, dogs, animals, so on and so on. So that began kind of a journey of getting back in touch with what had gone down in 2016 for me, and still kind of working that through. But that's kind of the shortened version of that event.
And so since then, from early October, we've done a 4-part series on Hurricane Helene and just the damage and trauma that people have experienced, and started telling stories of people that have gone through tremendous loss. And so one of the stories we did, Brandon, was a guy, Adrian. He's a volunteer fireman. And as we journaled, a lot of the comments, we've had hundreds of thousands of views of those videos, that 4-part series, and thousands of comments about healing and grief and trauma. Explain to us a little bit, your experience and how you've been on a path in healing from grief and trauma.
Yeah, totally. One of the things I want to go back to real quick before I answer that completely is even how that video, I watched that video with Adrian. That was his name, Adrian, right? That video alone, I mean, I watch so much YouTube content, it's crazy, but I was in tears. And it's also weird to watch one of your friends' videos because you're thinking, oh, you're kind of looking at it differently. You're looking at it, how did they film it? What was the sound like? Whatever. And man, and even having a background in that, I thought I was just immersed in what that guy's story was and what he was sharing, and even how he didn't want to go back to where he grew up riding motorcycles, even how he would talk about how deep something was. And like, that's where we found that person's dead. And then he would kind of go from really deep, tearful comments to like kind of joking. And I could relate with that toggle being, especially as a dude, I'm like, it's very deep and hurtful, but then you try to cover that up a little bit. Not that you're a bad person.
Most men don't want to have to deal with trauma, grief,
Yeah.
and they bury it.
Yeah. So I felt like you did a great job personally of just listening and giving him a space, because I know just from your content, I could tell it took time to get him in a place that he was even open to sharing. That really meant a lot to me, that he finally did start opening up to you, because you gave him a lot. I could tell the way you shot that, and it was probably over a course of days. It took you a few days to earn that dude's trust to the point that he would take you out into an area. I didn't want to go to Pensacola. I heard about that when I was out there. I'm like, I'm not taking my family up there, because they're like, that's where all the bodies are. And when you did that video, it still gives me chills just thinking of his honesty, his honesty about not wanting to be honest, his honesty about not wanting to go back to this site. I can relate with all that. And I didn't even have that much of personal loss. Like he had friends that died. And so anyway, I was bawling watching that video. And so I think that gives you a little peek into, that helped me process more of some of the loss that I've had in that area. Now, obviously I've done a lot of grief recovery work, in the last couple of years, that made me proficient in this process of how to work through grief and return to joy. But him sharing reminded me of needing to do some work about the loss I experienced in 2016. And because it is our home, it's my mom's home, is our memories. I mean, it was places I'd bring friends. It was places I had all my yearbooks. It had every bit of personal information I had. I have very little personal information about my life that I can show my children today, because it was all in that house and it's gone. Um, yeah, we did lose neighbors. They died. But even the trees, one of the things I loved about going down to Wimberley were these 300-year-old cypress trees that would just hang over like those Pirates of the Caribbean, like those cool firebugs and stuff. Those are snapped. Those are snapped like twigs. And that actually that's what triggered when I went up to that area where he was near Spruce Pine and Pensacola area. Everything was just that you didn't think it could snap. It was not. It was leveled. And so in going back to Wimberley and looking at those trees gone, I didn't want to go back anymore. It just lost all of its. I could relate with Adrian. I don't even want to go back there. It's a deep hurt. And so so it brought forth the need to do work on myself, but it also, Jeff, it brought up for me, what are these people going to do? Again, what are these people that have lost like animals? I mean, people that went on trips to get away from Florida and they came here and they lost their lives running from a storm down there. They came up here. I mean, and then just the overall community up there, those folks who lived up there, those part of the reason they don't want to work with FEMA is not because FEMA won't help them. It's because they have their own community. They have privacies. They don't want to be attached to some program. They just like to be left alone in their little village, in their little communities, and they're fighters. And now the things they used to live, they're gone. I mean, that to me is, I don't have an answer. Like I told you when you first came up, I said, don't bring water, bring stuff for the heat, bring stuff, sleeping bags, bring things they can cook with. Because there's so much water here, but we don't have is the basics to live. And so I begin to wonder how people would deal with that, and then ultimately how they would deal emotionally with the losses of friends and family and animals and that kind of stuff. So that's still kind of, that's not over. I mean, the media's gone. I mean, other people other than you are gone. Not many people hung around, only a few. And I'm just now starting to hear about people talking about how to get people help.
So now that the initial shock,
yeah,
or the initial deployment of people and America coming, and now that, people are leaving, now's the real time to do the work, the grief work. I know you personally, you've done it, you invested a lot of your life and your professionalism to grief recovery. Tell us about, for somebody who's out there watching and at the beginning stages of grief, and now that the dust is kind of per se settling, how would you walk them through the process?
Yeah, I would first of all start. I didn't know much about grief recovery in general. Like I didn't understand the process, and there's a lot of ways people go through grieving. Historically, grieving has been a cultural thing. Things you wear, things you don't wear. How the Bible says even how community grieves together. There is a process that I've learned about that I feel like is one of the best things I've ever learned, having tried everything, spent everything to go through so many emotional traumas that I've had, and nothing worked until something simple like grief. So grief recovery. So the first thing I would say is acknowledge, like what I was thinking and praying about this morning was, I would encourage people to decide if they want to choose life, because Jesus promises joy on the other side of grief. And so if we choose life and say, I want to get through this, I want to have joy in my life. I don't want to be bitter. I don't want to be isolated. I want to be quick tempered, or whatever the symptom would be. I would just see if people want healing, if they want to choose life, and just ask them if they're open to discussing a program or a process called grief recovery, and or dealing with grief. And how that could have affected them before the storm. Now, certainly the storm would add on to stuff that was already there. So it would just be more of, are you curious? Are you open to raising your hand and saying, I'm open to hearing more about what this looks like? That's where I would start.
And where would you go from there? So
Yeah.
somebody sees this video and says, I need help. Yes, what I've been through, I can't process on my own.
Yeah.
Then what?
Yeah. So if someone says, yes, I absolutely want that, then get in touch with, I know you'll maybe you drop my email in the link or put your contact information there. I know you'll add that in below the video. But just reach out and schedule some time. Schedule a 20-minute to 30-minute conversation with myself or some of the grief partners I have that we work with, men and women both alike. We want to help, and so we always are able to jump on a Zoom call, and have a conversation about what it looks like, what it is, what it isn't. Take the mystery out of this, take the heaviness out of the healing, talk about how easy and approachable this process is, and then go from there. And that's what I do, just schedule that call.
So outside of the storm that you experienced in 2016, people obviously experience trauma and grief in other areas, divorce, loss of a spouse, loss of a family member. Take us through kind of your healing journey of the grief and some of the storms you've been through in life.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with alcoholic family. I grew up with the alcoholics of alcoholic family. I started using alcohol as a young child, so there's been a lot of trauma in that category. Obviously, that kind of stuff you don't emotionally heal, so you end up hurting others. So I went through a divorce at one point, in a strange relationship with my daughter for some time. And along with I've had 2 strokes since, I'm 51. I've had 2 strokes. I mean, I can promise you this is, had I had grief recovery early on in my life, I would not have had 2 strokes. I mean, those are absolutely a response to stress in the body. And so they've done a lot of work about the emotional energy in the body, and how that's your body uses more energy to deal with a leaky bucket of grief and emotional hurt than pretty much anything other than your brain and your eyes. I mean, this takes huge real estate in our body to have all this pain circulating throughout our organs, throughout our brain, our hearts, and people wonder why they're sick. And so I actually had 2 strokes. And so I spent everything we had to try to heal. And what helped me heal physically was grief recovery, which some people don't believe me. And actually, because they asked me for my supplement list, they asked me for my doctor, they asked me for people, how did you heal from these strokes? I said, you're not going to like this answer, because when your body returns the joy, it returns the peace, you start to heal physically. That's not a miracle. That's just how God made us. And so I'm one of the testimonies for people to look at and say, hey, I want to know how you healed. And I see a lot of people hurt physically, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and it's going through that process. And it took me about probably a year and a half to work through the various relationships, the various traumas. When I say that, I want to make sure I preface that by saying, when I say work through it, it didn't take me a year to work through it. It just took me a year at times to convince myself to sit down and do the work, which only takes a couple hours each time you do it. But just avoiding it for so long, my friends literally finally just pinned me down. My friend Curtis that I work with, he's one of the counselors that helps people. He just said, man, he's like a broken record. Every time I talked to him and started complaining about the same thing and the same pain, at one point, I don't think you have any other choice, Brandon, because you've run out of money. Let's just give it a shot. And so between this process of grief work and another process that I used about how to magnify and trigger and activate joy in your life, those 2 things actually set me on a course of healing that I have been sharing with other people.
Well, and I've known you for almost 20 years, coming up on 20 years, and to see the changes that you've made in the last 5 years, and to know that grief recovery is a huge part of your healing and restoration and wholeness, you are not the same human being that I knew 20 years ago. You're just who you are and how you present yourself to the world, to your wife, to your friends, to your children. You literally are a walking testimony of transformation, of letting go of the pain, letting go of resentment, letting go of anger. And it's literally, I just want to commend you, because you are not the same human being that I knew 20 years ago.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, even yesterday I was on a walk with my family, and I just kept saying to myself, the joy of the Lord is my strength. The joy of the Lord is my strength. And just over and over, just began to speak that over me. Because if you think about that, the joy of the Lord is our strength. And I think a lot of people try to get strength from the gym. They try to get strength from relationships and other people, or they try to biohack. And I mean, I've got all the tools over there. I mean, I've got all the tools you need to quote unquote heal, but the joy of the Lord is your strength. And so I thought, and that's what I would say, Jeff, is um, had I not been shown something like this, I'd still be stuck, and you wouldn't have said what you just said. If I hadn't have had people sitting there working with me and just patiently pushing me back to the something different. I mean, and then I began to see in the biblical sense, I began to see over and over, I'll turn mourning to grief. When you see me, I'll turn your grief to joy. If you humble yourself, mourn, wail, and grieve, I'll lift you up. I mean, if you confess your sins to one another, which is actually the grief work, you're actually confessing the truth about what happened. Like, I lost this, or I don't like that, or I feel sad about that. Whatever the truth is, the Bible says the elders will pray over you and you'll be healed. And so I went to a service one time. The minister showed me in the Greek, or he showed the congregation, but he was really speaking to me. And he said, it's a promise in the Greek language that scripture right there is a promise that when you grieve, he will turn it to joy. There's 100% chance. And if joy of the Lord is our strength, I connect the dots that I need to get to joy. And I'm not there. I'm depressed, saddened, hurt, lonely, violently angry at times, manipulative, lying, like all the things. And I went to my buddy and I said, man, I went to a service today, and he showed me biblically how what you do, the work you do, is actually truth. It's the equation that Jesus created to heal us. And so I said, I'm ready. And so I got to turn myself. But Jeff, it took the years it was me running.
Well, and you've inspired me because I've been divorced for 3 years, and I'm still processing through the grief of the loss of a second marriage.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I need help. And so part of seeing you transform, I'm like, just through your growth, I'm like, hey, Brandon, can you help me?
Right.
Because there's things and baggage and weight that I'm still carrying that's weighing me down from my joy and my future. And so that's part of the reason why I wanted to have you on today, was I needed help, as I'm doing the work and trying to process, like, how did I get here? 49 years old, 2 failed marriages.
Yeah.
I need help and I don't know what to do. And so it's okay. I think one of the things that I want to model on this episode is that as men, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to be broken. It's okay to be weak. I'm weak. And it's okay to ask for help. And so I thank you for just your example. And so let's talk about that. You talked about putting words to emotions and how certain things that we've experienced, once we verbalize, hey, when this happened, this was the word or the verb that I felt. When I felt after a second failed marriage, I felt embarrassed.
Right.
I felt ashamed. I felt less than. I felt worthless. These were all feelings that for most of my life I've buried and I've hidden behind masks. I didn't want to feel those things. Those are no man wakes up and says, hey, I want to feel embarrassed, less than, ashamed, and weak.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we have to allow ourselves to feel those feelings to heal and grow. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's a great point. One of the things I want to go back on, and I'm not necessarily challenging what you said, because I think that's true. A lot of people they act like they don't have the answers. But what you find is, once you put some language to it, is you begin to let people have the answer. And they do have the answers deep down. It's just, so one of the things that we've had to do is actually, one of the things I've created in my kind of a phrase would say, like, if you look at this as like an emotional martial art, it starts off as a white belt and you would be a black belt at one point. And I thought, a lot of men, they want the answers. They don't like doing stuff they don't know. You hear a lot of guys like, I know this, but you get to this and this, they don't know how they feel. So number one is to say, we can help you know. We can help you actually go from a white belt to a black belt from an emotional growth perspective. And number two is, when we start off like at a white belt level, you have, sometimes we'll literally or most of the times we will send over or email over a list of feelings. Like here are real feelings. So it's just not cultural, Jeff. It's just not a cultural thing we go through talking about feelings. People think that's weak or that's heavy.
You know what some of those words are?
Yeah. So for example, one of the words that comes up for me when I've done grief work would be like abandoned or worthless. Um, those aren't inherently feelings. Those are things that people have done, and so what we're trying to do is we're still trying to assign the blame versus that it just happened, that it hurts. And so how does when someone abandons you, um just walking down, just on a walk yesterday with my family, everybody took off and left and I was behind, and I immediately, it triggered abandonment because I grew up in an abandoned scenario, right? But how I began to feel, how does that make me feel when everyone just takes off? And I immediately like Jesus says, I let peace return to me. But I said, I literally out loud, I've said, God, I feel sad. I feel mad. But I know that the joy of the Lord is my strength. And so I just want to recapture that joy. And so I said what it was. I quickly returned back and I had peace, and I went back to my van and waited by myself and read the Bible. Like, I had to take action, but I had to share honestly. Those are two of the feelings I began to feel. Worthlessness, for example, when I'd feel worthless, which is actually, that's kind of a judgment on yourself. That's not necessarily true. It's not necessarily a feeling. It's more of a state. Like, you're claiming I am worthless. That's more of like a adjective, which isn't true, but that's what came up for me over and over in grief work. Well, how does worthless make me feel? Embarrassed. How does embarrassed make me feel? I'll go another level. Angry. I can feel so angry and irate when I feel embarrassed because I don't know what to do. I feel powerless. And so I'm like, I want to go make someone love me and make them react, make them follow me or, bond with me. And I began to want to choke people out in my spirit. I just want to make something happen the way I would make work happen or make business happen, you know what I'm saying, or make sports happen the way, as athletes, we were both athletes, so we want to make that happen. It doesn't work like that when you're working with someone else's agents. There was a guy that he was referenced to me a couple of months ago. He's amazing man, huge heart. They were having some marital stuff. I got a reference to help him with his marriage because I do some marriage counseling and got a deep passion for that. That's grief shows up a lot in marriage. Grief work need a lot of grief work to have a great marriage. And he was one of the ones, the first responders out there cutting trees down, literally told me he was pulling dead bodies out of the trees. And I said, dude, I would love to help you with marriage, bro, but you need to grieve this. This is traumatic. And so he pulled back from the marriage counseling, and we're focusing in on that right now. Because he can't, like I said, with my daughter, like, I can't be a good dad or a great husband if I'm not dealing with the own things triggering me. So he was really grateful. He's a good man. He told me, I feel strong and I love deep. And he's so Appalachian, man, cutting trees down, just bigger than life. Everyone's 6'4", 250, but just has the softest spirit, but just has accumulated grief. It is so obvious, but I just slowly tease it out every time we talk because it just doesn't want to talk about some of this stuff. So it's been good. But again, like you said, this is what has to happen first before those relationships bear fruit. You can't go into your next deal if you haven't solved the last deal.
So for somebody watching this and saying, I wonder if I have unhealed grief, what are some of the indicators that you would say, hey, these are 10 things, 10 signs that you may want to reach out and get some help?
Right. So I think I mentioned a few of them, but having a busy mind. That's one of the things I talked with this guy the other day. He's racing around, just jumping from topic to topic, not able to be still. That's a huge sign for unresolved emotional grief and trauma. Volatility, like quick tempered. I mean, you look at like people that have gone through war, that's it's PTSD. They know that this guy all of a sudden hears a firework, he's real jumpy. That happens with people every day that didn't go through war, because wars are different for each one of us. So each, like what you mentioned with your situation, you went through a war, you've been through wars, and I know more about you, but you've been through a lot of wars actually. And so jumpiness, inability to be still, volatility and anger, and then going from that volatility and anger to isolation, like trying to get away. And of course, then the other big ones of the, once you do that, then you got using, like one guy recently I was working with, he just got off of 10 years of painkillers. He began to realize that even though he say it was for his knee, it's moved into an addiction. So those kind of addictions show up very easily. Those are typically usually there from the beginning somehow, whether it be coffee, smoking, like it has various levels of how it extrapolates. But yeah, so using a substance to kind of check out, that would be a huge one. One of the ones that I really love to talk about is, and I kind of, when I work with folks, I make this really a premium, is how they're relational. There's a part of the brain that's called the cingulate cortex that when you're dealing with deep grief, you literally can't see or hear what people are saying correctly. You know what Jesus says? If you have ears to hear, if you have eyes to see, you let you see or hear. That part of your brain is the emotional switch in the brain that if that's not closed, then you don't feel safe, and you're constantly unrelational with people, even yourself and others. So we need to close that loop. And the way you close that loop is you help people feel safe again, to be still and to start to listen. And so I watch people's eyes a lot when they're bouncing around working with folks. I can tell that part of the brain is shutting down because their eyes are all over. So your eye movement's a lot. So these are some like premium examples of how you know someone's been through some trauma and grief that need help. And I want to encourage people to think, because I do get this a lot. Well, I already see a therapist. Because I would wonder, like, what are other things out there? I'll be asking, if I was someone else listening to this, I would also be asking, why didn't other things not work, and what else is there to work? Because immediately people just don't want to believe what you're saying; they got to see it. So I agree. I appreciate you sharing that it worked in my life. I paid for everything. I actually went back to school to get my master's in counseling, and one of the things I find is completing grief is, I'm not saying it's free if you work with someone, but ultimately it's free. Having a private practice where you have people coming in all the time, that's expensive. And we weren't taught to help people heal in school. Grief work is all about healing, completing, and moving forward to joy. So could grief work with someone who's quote unquote bipolar or quote unquote has anxiety disorder? Well, I had panic attacks, Jeff, since I was 17. I have no panic attacks. I'm totally healed from anxiety. And so I think this works. Even if you are going to do other stuff, you got to deal with that trauma and the deep grief in your heart to move forward. And so I think a lot of counselors I know are starting to get into grief work because they realize, man, this old theory, these old Freudian stuff, this isn't working. Especially how wired we are with phones and computers now. It just doesn't work. We can have healing it through the internet. We don't even have to move. We can stay on our couch and I can help someone heal. There's so many possibilities with this. And I want to make sure people have that belief that I can identify feelings, I can handle going through it, and I absolutely can get help even if I don't have a lot of money. That's very important to me, that people realize they don't need a lot of money to heal. Jesus says, come to me who are weary and burdened, I'll give you rest, and that my burden is light. My yoke is not heavy. I think people feel heavy when they think about going out and trying to find help.
And it doesn't have to be.
It doesn't have to be heavy. In fact, the tagline we have with our group is, we take the heaviness out of healing. Especially for dudes. All your men out there, it doesn't have to be heavy. What's heavy is another divorce. That's heavy. What's heavy is losing all your money in a bad real estate deal that you did with a bad relationship. And I think partners get into business partnerships, Jeff. One of the things I want to help business partners do is make sure they're doing a little grief work before they choose a partner, so they know whether or not they're choosing the right partner. Because remember, that relational part of the brain could be shut down a little bit, that we can't see a good partner or not yet. Let's do a little work and then pick your partner. I can save people lots of money. I saved this one guy $1 million in losing his home in Orange County because I helped him de-escalate going through grief recovery, that he was able to walk through a divorce he had and not lose his shorts. It's all possible. It's just raising your hand saying, this can be very practical.
Well, man, I know you've helped me a ton. I'm going to put your link at the end of this video. Is there anything else you want to share before we kind of close up?
No, I just appreciate this time. I hope that Jeff and I have been praying for people to raise their hand, just even if it's one person. Hey, I'm interested. Just having a conversation with someone. That's so powerful. That's so empowering to know that you picked up the phone or emailed someone and say, hey, I'm curious. Most people don't choose that. And I just want to say in advance, I'm proud of anyone who just says, hey, I'm open to hearing more. And we'll let the journey take course of way it's supposed to go. And also to trust the process. A lot of people come to us, have a mind of what their grief journey will look like. Like, I want to do it like this. I want to focus on my dog when I was, sometimes it's a relationship you don't even know. Healing that one relationship can unlock. There was this one relationship I healed that unlocked probably 10 relationships I didn't even have to grieve, because I went back to the epicenter and dealt with the one, and it snowballed, and that other one was just like, that was dumb. That should never even happen. So I think just don't have a prescribed view. When is grief recovery not work is when you come in thinking you're determining how you're going to run the grief work. That's not a good plan. So I would just say that is be open.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you, man. I've gleaned so much wisdom from our friendship and relationship. And I know that, 2 years ago with a 9mm, about 5 minutes from blowing my head off, you've really helped me kind of grieve through suicidal thoughts, depression, porn addiction, drug addiction, and you've really walked out my journey. And I know that I would not be where I'm at today without you and your friendship and your brotherhood. And that's why I wanted to share you and everything you've been through. Because it's one thing to, like you said, have a degree. It's another to say, hey, let me show you my scars.
Yeah.
I've been through it. I didn't enter this space because I did everything right. We didn't start Battle Worth Fighting because I did everything right. Battle Worth Fighting was started out of my own failures and my life's mistakes, and said, surely I can't be the only man on planet Earth that's blown up their life and doesn't know how to put it back together. And it was in those moments where God really showed up. And so I feel like you've showed up to me at the right times in different seasons. And, I'm excited. I think there could be a weekly series that you and I do where we just get on and we talk about real life topics that men don't want to face or talk about. And we say, hey, we'll go first. We'll go first. I blew up everything. I made every mistake. Follow me. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. It's actually the beginning of your life.
Yeah.
And just the freedom that you've helped me feel and grow and heal from. And even in this grief work, I'm like, man, it's time for me to go deeper. I've done my counseling and Celebrate Recoveries, all great programs and a lot of personal healing, but there's more. There's another layer. And I feel like this grief work for me, especially of seeing it in other people up in Western North Carolina, it's when you see it in other people and you're like, wait a second, I think there's still unresolved trauma in my life. So, you know how I feel about you. I love you, man. And an open invitation to come on and share your wisdom anytime you want.
I love the work you're doing. I love the going to dark and broken places to bring healing. That's a passion for you. I love that about you, and that's also passion for me as well. I think this is a blue ocean. There's not a crowded room of a bunch of people, meaning there's a lot more healing out there than there is people to help. And so I appreciate your channel. I appreciate the practical approach and covering stories that ultimately end in some dark spaces where people can get help. So, man, I appreciate being on, and yeah, I'd love to come on. I'd love to. I have some other crew members in my posse out here with the grief, some dudes I work with, and they're just we have more and more resources out there than we can imagine, and we'd love to share whatever we can to help.
Awesome. So thanks everybody for watching. If you've benefited from this show, please click the like and subscribe button. We are a self-funded ministry, so we depend on subscribers and views to continue the work that we do. We also have a link to our donate button for our ministry. Please feel free at the end of the year, if you feel compelled, to help support Brandon and I's work. We want to be able to offer this and these services where people don't have to worry about money and resources to heal and grieve. So we are going to create a special link just for grief work for Brandon to start the process, and share it with somebody. If somebody you know has unresolved grief, send this video and have this be the catalyst to say, hey, these two guys are trying to lead the way and blaze the trail for healing. So thanks for watching, and we love you all. Have a great holiday and a happy new year.
Take care.